Dr. William Rosenberg is a professor of political science at Drexel University. He is the co-author of News Verdicts, the Debates and Presidential Campaigns. He is joining us and tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg. Bill, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning.
As we prepare for a week of remembrances, do you have any particular thoughts, any memories or points to make about the legacy of President George H.W.Bush, our 41st president?
Well, George Bush is one of the few remaining top-tier politicians that came to power and also served in the World War II events with the passing of John McCain, who was a Vietnam-era person. We're seeing sort of a turnover in terms of leadership in the country from those that were the part of the greatest generation to those that were part of the Vietnam generation to now the post-Vietnam generation. Bush has an interesting legacy. I remember back in the 1980 run-up to the election, he actually competed against Ronald Reagan, and one of the things that he made clear out on the campaign trail is that he believed in the same things that Ronald Reagan did, only he was a lot younger. So he had an interesting sense of humor, and at some point, Reagan eventually took him on as his vice presidential candidate. The legacy of George Herbert Walker Bush is a little bit mixed, though, and when I've been watching the media coverage of them, it tends to glorify his achievements but sort of downplay some of the less positive images as well, and that happens all the time when someone dies. You don't really speak ill of the dead. But one of the things that I think is important to realize is that he had a long career that included the United States Senate, the CIA, the vice presidency, but he also had a long career in terms of philanthropy. He developed a wonderful relationship with the person who ended up defeating him for the presidency, Bill Clinton, and they worked together very well in terms of raising funds for disaster victims and so on. But we have to also remember that George Bush was the person who brought into his camp Lee Atwater, who was one of the most dirty of dirty tricks people that raised the Willie Horton ads. And for most young people, Willie Horton doesn't resonate very much. But it was a major dirty trick ad that was used against Michael Dukakis. So while he has very positive traits, he also associated with various events that were not so terrific. For example, the Iran-Contra situation with Oliver North. So when we take stock right now, this week, we celebrate the man, we celebrate the events that he was a leader on, and over time, history will write the story of Herbert Walker Bush.
The Willie Horton ad you referenced, that was actually an outside group that put that together, right? Even though Lee Atwater was campaign manager for President George H.W. Bush when he was a candidate.
That may be true, but that was part of the campaign. The campaign, basically, by bringing in Atwater, he was bringing in someone that was all about stooping to the lowest levels of political conflict. You have the issues of outside groups, but you also have this tacit sort of approval of someone like Lee Atwater.
Bring it to present day, Bill. Let's talk about this president because, every president faces domestic and international pressures. George H.W. Bush had his own problem with a recession, which was kind of minor by today's standards. And foreign policy, things seemed to be going well. Everyone loved him after the war. It was 90% approval ratings after the Gulf War, the end of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany. But that domestic issue that got him was the economy in 1992. And I kind of wonder what President Trump is doing right now to be able to, I guess, solidify where he is going to be in 2020.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up taxes because one of the most often played tapes of George Bush was his no new taxes routine, where he made that speech that said he wasn't going to raise taxes, and in the end he did, and it cost him somewhat politically. But he was also a realist. He recognized that it needed to be done. what we're dealing with right now is a situation in the United States, but also around the world, where the economy seems to be such that the wealthy are doing quite well, and the middle class and the poor are not doing so well. If you take a look at what's going on in France, we often look at Macron as being a very progressive leader, but the Yellow Jacket group over there is doing massive protests that are made up not just of the left, but also of the right. And one of the things that I fear is that potentially those types of conflicts could arise in the United States. There is a little bit of tone deafness that exists with Donald Trump in terms of the way society has gone, and he truly believes that the economy is doing great. He constantly gives that refrain out. He goes to rallies and talks about it. But we just saw massive layoffs at General Motors recently. We saw one of his first acts, Donald Trump, with the, quote, saving of Carrier Company in Indiana, only to find out later that Carrier ended up not staying in Indiana in the same way that they were supposed to. So we're in an economic turmoil that hasn't quite boiled over like it has in France, but the potential is there.
Well, we've got a lot to cover between now and 2020, so we'll just, and we'll have plenty of time to do it. Bill Rosenberg, thanks as always for being here, Bill.
Sorry I couldn't be more positive on some of these issues, but George Bush did lead the United States in a difficult period, but he also accomplished much as well. So I would like to leave that as my final message there.
Thank you, Bill. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, joining us here this morning and tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg, Rosenberg.